February 11th is unlike any other date in the recent history of the Church. On that day, during a seemingly ordinary consistory for canonizations, something happened that no one had expected for centuries. Benedict the Sixteenth announces in Latin, before the cardinals, his renunciation of the Petrine ministry. A decision unseen in nearly 600 years. A fracture, a precedent, an earthquake. The official reason is known. 85 years of age, diminished physical strength, and no longer sufficient spiritual energy to govern the bark of Peter. The exact time of his death is also fixed, February 28th, 8 p.m. From that moment on, the Pope will no longer be Pope. He will remain in the Vatican, in prayer, as Emeritus, a figure who has never truly existed in the modern ecclesiastical era. Two popes alive simultaneously, an unprecedented situation in contemporary Catholic consciousness. Yet that decision wasn't born in a vacuum. It came after years of tension, isolation, and deep wounds. The Vatileaks affair shook the Vatican to its core. Confidential documents stolen from the Pope's desk, published in newspapers, internal revelations, power struggles, not an external enemy, but a betrayal from within. His personal butler implicated, a broken trust, a pope who feels surrounded, worn down, perhaps even left alone in government. Added to this is the global explosion of abuse scandals, which erupted systemically during his pontificate. Events dating back decades, but which exploded under his name. And again, communication crises, such as the Regensburg Lecture, which strained relations with the Islamic world. The case of the Lefebvrists and Bishop Williamson, with devastating media consequences. A theologically lofty pontificate, yet constantly exposed to storms. According to reliable sources, the decision came after a fall during a trip to Mexico, an incident that forced the pontiff to confront his own physical fragility. World Youth Day in Brazil is approaching. An intercontinental journey, a global event. The realization that it couldn't keep up with that pace became a point of no return. A long period of silent prayer and discernment began. Very few were informed, no public announcement, and then the announcement. But today, years later, that decision is being viewed surprisingly critically by an authoritative voice in the Italian Church, Cardinal Ruini. Not a marginal observer, not a polemicist, a protagonist of Italian Catholicism in recent decades. Ruini openly states that Benedict XVI's resignation was, in his opinion, a mistaken decision. Harsh words. Words that reopen a wound that has never fully healed. Of course, he adds that Ratzinger knew his own situation better than anyone else. But the verdict remains a mistake. Why is this a mistake? Because the papacy is not an administrative office, it is not a corporate function, it is a fatherhood, it is a cross. It is a mission that, in the traditional conscience of the Church, is exercised to the end. The resignation introduces a new paradigm. The Pope, who assesses himself as fit or unfit. The Pope who resigns. The Pope who opens a door. And that door, as has been said many times, remains open. Ruini doesn't stop there. He calls John Paul X the greatest pope of the last century, a true world leader. He recognizes Benedict XVI's theological greatness, but maintains that governance was his weakness. An analysis that, read together with the judgment on his resignation, becomes explosive. A theologian pope, perhaps not sufficiently strong in government, who chooses to step down in a moment of crisis. But the most delicate point comes when Ruini speaks of his successor. The change introduced by Francis is being called too great, too sudden. Not a simple evolution, but a perceived rupture. And then that phrase, destined to spark controversy. Francis was more beloved by non-believers than by believers. A statement that in itself is enough to paint a picture. If a pope receives greater enthusiasm from the secularized world than from practicing faithful, what does it mean? Is it a sign of successful dialogue or a weakened identity? Is it evangelical openness or cultural collapse? The question remains unanswered, but the subtext is clear. Ruini speaks of a lack of attention to tradition. He doesn't deny the council. Indeed, he asserts his own enthusiasm for it, but he denounces the excesses that have called into question fundamental dogmas, such as the divinity of Christ and sexual morality. It's a clear line. Reform, yes. Dissolution, no. And while he explicitly rejects the return to the Latin Mass, supporting the importance of linguistic understanding, he firmly reiterates the impossibility of female ordination for Christological reasons. And above all, against certain contemporary theologies, he affirms that hell is not empty at all. He fears God's judgment. He does not trivialize eschatology. He does not sugarcoat the gospel. And then the picture becomes more complicated. On the one hand, a pope who resigns, ushering in a new and unprecedented era. On the other, a prominent cardinal who views that decision as a mistake. In the meantime, a subsequent pontificate has aroused global media enthusiasm but disquiet in significant sectors of the Catholic world. This isn't nostalgia. It's not ideological alignment. It's a profound question. What has become of the papacy since February 11th? Did it remain an irrevocable ministry until death, or did it transform into a function that can be relinquished when one's strength wanes? And what effect did this transformation have on the perception of Petrine authority? The resignation of Benedict XVI ushered in an era. Like it or not, it changed the grammar of power in the Church. It introduced the category of Pope Emeritus. It demonstrated that the throne of Peter is not necessarily occupied until one's last breath. But every change brings with it consequences. When Ruini speaks of a too abrupt change with Francis, he seems to evoke precisely that fracture. Not just a succession, but a discontinuity. Not just a different style, but a different perception of tradition. And so, years later, Benedict XVI's resignation no longer appears merely as a gesture of personal humility. It becomes a historic turning point. A turning point. An act that continues to generate long-lasting reverberations. On February 28th at 8 p.m., a pontificate formally ended. But perhaps at that moment, an even more complex phase began. A phase in which the figure of the Pope is no longer simply a father and shepherd until the end, but also a man who can choose to step aside. And today, amid critical judgments, tensions over tradition, accusations of rupture and defenses of renewal, that choice continues to challenge the Catholic conscience. It's not just history, it's still an open question. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.